Welcome back. As mentioned previously, climate change will affect mean temperatures, rates of precipitation, and sea level rise that will impact human society and our economy. Cities face the greatest risks regarding climate change due to their higher concentrations of populations and assets. The effects of climate change, combined with increasing urbanization, will affect our quality of life and our economic and social well-being. Therefore, understanding these impacts is vital. After this video, you will be able to understand how these impacts will affect our cities and their populations. When considering the characteristics of a city, most have high amounts of concrete and asphalt due to their many buildings and roads. These materials absorb and conduct heat faster than surrounding rural areas, often leading to higher temperatures, making heat waves more severe in these regions. In addition to the materials used, the tall heights and geometry of urban buildings can reflect and absorb further sunlight and heat. When a metropolitan area is significantly warmer than its rural surroundings, it is considered an urban heat island. Other sources which contribute to the urban heat island effect are air conditioning units, industry byproducts, and waste heat from vehicles. Another impact of having higher atmospheric temperatures is that the air retains more water, leading to more precipitation and storms. This can cause localized flooding, affecting infrastructure in the area, in addition to power outages and physical destruction. For many cities, its geographic location near low coastlines often results in higher levels of vulnerability. For historical and economic reasons, most major cities in Africa are located along the coast or major bodies of water for transport and trade. Whereas previously these locations helped to make them important economic centers, it now makes them vulnerable to sea level rise and flooding. This map highlights the many African cities that are at risk due to rising sea levels. From the circles on the map, you can see how many cities are at threat due to being situated in low coastal elevation zones. Many of these cities also have populations over 1 million, signified by the red circles. Let's investigate some cities further. With the sea level rise of 50 centimeters, more than 2 million people will have to abandon their homes in Alexandria, Rosetta, Port Said, with loss in property values and tourism incomes of over $35 billion US. This is without considering the immeasurable loss of Egypt's world-famous archaeological sites. The majority of Gambia's capital, Banjul, is less than 1 meter above sea level, and with an increasingly warming climate, the impacts of tropical storms will intensify flooding in the city. On the other side of the continent, Mombasa in Kenya will also suffer similar issues in addition to agricultural stresses because of waterlogged and salt-saturated land. An increase in salt water can also threaten freshwater sources, affecting drinking sources for a city. Sea level rises are not the only water-related issues that cause impacts. With changes in precipitation patterns across the continent, water stress is expected to increase for many countries. This graph shows the water availability of 28 African countries in 1990 in light blue, and the expected availability in 2025 depicted in dark blue. It is estimated that within the next 10 years, all these countries will be at least vulnerable to water availability, having under 2,500 cubic meters of water per person per year. For many countries such as Kenya, South Africa, and Somalia, the situation will be even worse, particularly regarding water scarcity issues. Additionally, within cities, the increased temperatures from the urban heat island effect can be transferred to storm water, worsening water pollution and contamination. In addition to the impacts that will affect infrastructure, transport, and water systems, climate change is likely to also affect both energy supply and demand. Across Africa, hydroelectric power generation is likely to be restricted with the more frequent occurrence of drought periods. On the Zambezi River, the Batoka hydroelectric project is being planned between Zambia and Zimbabwe. However, if climate change simulations are correct, decreases in monthly river flow could prevent the success of the project. Whereas the change in local weather conditions can affect infrastructure and the material aspects of a city, public health in urban areas is also at risk. Heat waves in cities have the potential to increase heat stress and heat-related mortalities, with effects such as respiratory diseases and hospitalization. In 2003, a severe heat wave killed more than 70,000 people in Europe, and events like this are expected to rise. The increasing intensity of storms and flooding can also cause death and injuries, in addition to expensive and long-term damage to medical facilities. The potential spread of various diseases is also important to consider. As mentioned, the increase in water temperature and flooding can cause additional contaminants entering water supplies, which can raise rates of respiratory and diarrheal diseases. Malaria could become a greater concern for populations in different regions in Africa due to changes in rainfall, humidity, and temperature. An additional medical concern is the effect of natural disasters on mental health, with victims from such events often suffering from post-traumatic stress, depression, and anxiety. On the topic of health, poverty is a key and important compounding factor to consider, aggravating potential health impacts and putting millions of urban inhabitants at risk. The UN Habitat stated that the number of people living in informal settlements is estimated to reach nearly 900 million by 2020, leaving a great number of people highly vulnerable to the stresses and shocks associated with climate hazards, resource scarcities, and degradation of ecosystems, such as forests. These individuals live in dwellings that are of poor quality, lack sufficient drainage systems, and have a lower adaptive capacity due to lower incomes. Slums and informal settlements are often located in floodplains, riverbanks, and marshes, exacerbating the vulnerabilities of these populations. Additionally, due to risk of losing belongings to looters and not being able to return to their homes, many are reluctant to leave these high-risk areas even when bad weather is on its way. People within these areas are even more vulnerable to the public health risks referred to earlier. It should also be remembered that this is also an issue in developed countries. If we use Hurricane Katrina in the United States as an example, many poorer residents in New Orleans were left devastated as they did not have the necessary resources to evacuate compared with their higher income neighbors. In addition to low-income communities, there are other groups that are vulnerable to climate threats. Gender plays a large role, with women more vulnerable to climate change effects. Reasons for this include sociocultural expectations in some countries, such as the role of women in securing food and water for their households and having minimal or no control over financial assets. Age can be another factor, with children and the elderly suffering from similar physical and social vulnerabilities. Discriminatory practices to minorities and indigenous groups also hinder their potential of coping in hazardous situations. Climate change impacts magnify inequalities in society, and urban policymakers need to ensure there is further inclusion and consideration of these groups in future city planning. As we have seen in this video, there are an array of impacts that will occur within our cities from anthropogenic climate change. Not only will it have an effect on our infrastructure and energy, it will also have negative effects on our city population's health. Additionally, these impacts will not affect everyone equally, with people from certain demographic and income groups being hindered by change in the climate more than others. Even though this video provides disturbing evidence on climate change impacts, and it might be disturbing, the following videos will be address how we can respond to this issue. What policies are currently in place to ensure decisive measures are implemented on a global scale? Also, how are cities involved in these decisions? The global climate change policy landscape will be discussed in our next video.